I'm here in Fitzrovia to look at the residence of quite a remarkable man. Now, Fitzrovia has had no shortage of remarkable residents, from anti-slavery campaigner Olaudah Equiano to Francisco de Miranda. And here on Fitzroy Street, just a few paces from Fitzroy Square, is Fitzroy House, one-time residence of L. Ron Hubbard. Hubbard is a fascinating and divisive figure. Most famous as the founder of the Church of Scientology, Hubbard was also a best-selling author who claimed to have been a war hero, a policeman, a barnstorming pilot, a botanist, a pioneering nuclear physicist, an explorer, an adventurer, and even the Antichrist. To his followers, he is nothing less than the greatest man who ever lived. To his detractors, a compulsive liar, a bigamist, a con artist, and a madman. What is objectively true is that Hubbard was born in Nebraska in 1911. He travelled extensively during his early years, following his father's naval postings. He claims during this time to have been lassoing cattle from the age of 3, to have been made a blood brother in the Blackfoot tribe at the age of 4, and to have become the youngest ever Eagle Scout. He did very poorly at school and university, although the latter would give him the basis for his claim to be one of the world's first nuclear physicists. He saw himself as something of an adventurer, though his attempts at making his name in this area inevitably ended in failure. During the Second World War, he joined the US Navy, where, according to his followers, he was like what you'd get if Horatio Nelson and Captain America had a baby. The reality is that his naval career was less than distinguished, punctuated by blunders, hypochondria, and on one memorable occasion, an act of war against Mexico. Following the war, and his dishonourable discharge, he befriended occultist and rocket scientist Jack Parsons and took up the study of the works of Aleister Crowley. The partnership with Parsons dissolved acrimoniously in a storm of bigamy, financial misappropriation, and an actual storm. It was at this point that Hubbard came to believe himself to be the Antichrist. The two constants in his life had been an elevated view of his own importance and the total inability to back that up with actual success. In later years, these failures were rewritten as stunning successes. Inevitably, a Hubbard anecdote would have a punchline that could be summed up as, "And would you believe it, it turned out that I was the absolute best at that job. But I decided to leave it anyway, for my own reasons." Later on, he would add anecdotes from his alleged past lives, which took him to newer and yet more heroic heights. The one thing Hubbard was debatably good at was writing, and his contributions to pulp magazines were his one consistent way of making a living. In fairness, some of these stories are legitimately good. Both Typewriter in the Sky and Fear receive critical plaudits, even from non-Scientologists. And I will say that Hubbard was good at spinning a page-turning yarn. But this wasn't enough. Hubbard wanted, in his own words, to smash his name into history. His first attempt at this was a monumental book called Excalibur, inspired by an alleged near-death experience at his dentist. This book was so incredible, so revelatory, that it was claimed to have induced insanity and even suicide in those who read it, according to Hubbard. Although evidence to back this up is notably absent, it might explain why the book was never published. Or it might just have not been very good. You decide. In 1950, elements of Excalibur were reworked into Dianetics, a self-help book which, to sum up, claims that all of our psychological problems are caused by memories stored in something called the reactive mind. The book sold well, although critics were quick to point out the lack of evidence for Hubbard's remarkable claims therein. This resulted in a one-sided feud between Hubbard and psychiatry, which, through the Church of Scientology, continues to this day. Scientologists claim psychiatry is behind everything evil in the world. Hubbard's critics claim it's just a case of the man's own narcissistic injury. From 1953 onwards, Hubbard became interested in turning Dianetics into a religion. A quote often attributed to him is, "Start a religion, that's where the real money is." However, no one seems to be able to pinpoint exactly when he said this. A religious organisation had a number of advantages over a pseudoscientific one. They could get tax breaks, they could avoid scrutiny for their scientific claims, and importantly for Hubbard, he could be literally worshipped. The Church of Scientology, its beliefs, origins and controversies could fill several videos in itself, and indeed it has if you take a look around YouTube and online. Suffice it to say, for now, that it's exactly the sort of organisation you'd expect someone like Hubbard to come up with. Take that as you will. I hope you'll forgive me for this very long preamble, but as you can tell, I find Hubbard an intriguing character, if not for the reasons his followers do. Fitzroy House is a Georgian structure dating back to 1791, once inhabited by George Bernard Shaw. Our man Hubbard bought the place through the Hubbard Association of Scientologists International in 1956 to serve as his London headquarters. There had been a Dianetics craze in the UK as there had been in the US, and in 1952 the Dianetic Foundation of Great Britain had been launched. In 1959, Fitzroy House would be superseded with the purchase of St Hill Manor in East Sussex, which would become the church's worldwide headquarters. It was there that the madness would really set in. Surrounded by yes-men, Hubbard's ego was now entirely unfettered and yet at the same time increasingly fragile. He became ever more paranoid, believing himself to be surrounded by enemies and insisting on every minor misdemeanour made by members of the church being reported to headquarters. He wasn't entirely wrong, but his enemies were tax authorities and police departments, who weren't entirely on board with his apparent view that laws and basic decency were something that applied to other people. In 1968, the church was denounced by Health Minister Kenneth Robertson as a menace. The Church of Scientology proved his point by conducting a bizarre campaign of libel against him, claiming among other things that Robertson was insane and had created secret death camps. The Home Office banned the entry of foreign Scientologists, and Hubbard, smarting with narcissistic injury, sold Fitzroy House that year and moved his worldwide headquarters to a fleet of ships in 1969. St Hill remained important in the organisation, and it was from here that the church would organise an extraordinary programme of illegal infiltrations of various government organisations under the code name Operation Snow White. The discovery of this and various other legal complications resulted in L. Ron Hubbard spending much of the 70s and 80s in hiding, his mental and physical health deteriorating drastically. He would die a fugitive in January 1986 from a stroke that he was somehow unable to cure with his Dianetic powers. To the true believers, he voluntarily dropped his body in order to continue his research elsewhere in the universe, to someday return in a new and even greater incarnation. Indeed, every Scientology org includes an empty office set up for his return. The Church, of course, these days portrays him as nothing less than the most important man in history. Attempts to paint a more objective portrait of the man are suppressed or denounced. They don't like it when you ask why, if he was such an amazing man, there are no records of his incredible achievements outside of the church's own accounts. Someday, they assure you, everyone will be aware of his greatness. I've only touched on a very small part of the insanity of the life of L. Ron Hubbard because, quite frankly, there's just so much. A brief Google search can lead you down a rabbit hole of crazy. I haven't touched upon his affirmations, his attempts to prove his science, his racism, his attempt to conquer Rhodesia, his bigamy, or any of the many, many other strange aspects of this unique individual. I strongly recommend the blog The Underground Bunker and the website Operation Clambake as starting points if you'd like to know more. So what of Fitzroy House? Well, it was later bought back by the Church of Scientology. An attempt to get a blue plaque put up by the church in 2009 was turned down on the grounds that they were unconvinced of Hubbard's reputation in English heritage. Nevertheless, it remains an important site for Scientologists and is currently preserved as a museum of Hubbard's time there as it was in the 1950s. It can be visited by appointment. I haven't been myself, I must admit, and having made this video, I probably never will. Oh well.